that. And so that's really, yes, it is. It's an exhausting process. So we'll go ahead and start. All right. Jacob, do you want to tell us when we're live on Facebook, on YouTube? We're live. All right. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another Poison Pen event. My name is Patrick. I am the science fiction, fantasy, young adult, and children's selector here at the store. Today, I am really fortunate to have two of our local and great young adult novelists, Sara Ella and Ashley Bustamante. Welcome so much. So, those of you who might have remembered not too long ago, Sara Ella and I had a conversation with Ruth Meyer, and today we get to have a conversation with Ashley with her new book, Vivid, and Sara has her new book at the Wonderland Trials. So welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for coming on out.
Thank you for having us.
So this is exciting for, well, Sara, for you, this is book 5, book 4.
Book 5. It's book 5.
It is book 5. Yeah. That's what I thought, looking up this morning, that you're up to book 5. And this, Ashley, is book 1 for you, right?
Yeah.
So you are a debut novelist. So I've got to say, how does that feel to know that your first book is out for everybody to read?
It's weird. Like when you work on something for so long and then it's finally out there, it's just kind of this unreal feeling. But it's really, really exciting to finally see it and be like, that's what I've been working on. It's there. There's my book. And so very exciting.
Well, Enclave Publishing, who you've been working with, has done a really nice job. I absolutely love both yours and Sara's covers of the books. Vivid is what this book is. This is an incredibly colorful book, very bright. Sara, your book, Wonderland Trials, is a dystopian Alice in Wonderland, so to speak. And so I thought of that as very muted. So your cover on your book is incredibly muted. So I've got to ask you, as a writer, do you guys have much input into what goes into your covers?
We get, I think, more than a lot of authors do. Enclave. One of the things that I love so much about Enclave, we actually fill out a whole document that goes to the cover designer to give them ideas. And the publisher obviously gets the ultimate say, but they really, they're passionate about getting a cover that matches the story, because I think we've all seen those books where we read the book and then we look at the cover and we go, what did that have to do with the book? So I think that's really cool, and I appreciate that we get input.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't know if you kind of told them what you wanted on your cover, but for my cover, I said, this is exactly what I want, but I'm not an artist. I gave him like a really flat looking graphic that I made on PicMonkey. And I said, this is the concept. And of course, he's amazing. My cover, did you have Kirk as your designer?
I had
Emily. Both of our designers just are amazing. And he took that idea and ran with it. And I actually recently got to sit down with him at a writer's conference and tell him exactly what I wanted on book 2. And I've just seen that cover. And he did exactly what I wanted, so I'm really excited to share that with the world in 6 months.
That's one of the things that's always so frustrating and exciting about becoming a writer is you're talking about book 1. You're well into the depths of book 2, aren't you, for both of you?
Yeah, and book 3, too.
Yep,
Yeah.
I'm just about to, did you just get edit? Did you just
Yep,
go through edits?
I just turned in my edits.
Okay.
For book 2.
I'm about to get edits back for book 2. So
Nice. So can you explain a little bit to, maybe we have some young adult listeners out there who have never really gone through what the publishing process looks like. What did it look like for you to start with, from writing your book to production? What did that process look like?
And that it's going to be a little bit different for everybody. For me, it was kind of a long road. I wrote the first draft of it in 2014, and then did the rookie writer thing where I'm like, I finished my book, I'm going to send it everywhere, and it wasn't ready. So lots and lots of rejections followed. But then I decided, I'm like, well, I want to do this. I want to do the work. So I started attending writers' conferences and taking workshops and got serious about it and did a lot of work revising it, getting it to where it needed to be. And then signed on with Enclave in 2021.
So would you say your book was not perfect the first time you wrote it?
That's an understatement. It was so far from it. And I think a lot of people kind of go in when they decide they want to submit a book for publication. They go in with the idea that if the story and the concept is good enough, it doesn't matter if the rest is a mess because you'll have an editor. And it's true, you'll have an editor. But if they look at it and say, this is going to be so much work, they have a million other manuscripts to look at that will be less work for them. And they'll go for those manuscripts. So you really want to put forth your very best product. And that's not to say that it won't still change, but you want to present the very best that you've got.
Absolutely. I don't know if did you hire a freelance editor for?
Yes,
Yeah.
I did. And that was actually your suggestion.
Yep, I hired a freelance editor for my debut novel, and I really think it's what made my debut stand out. For Wonderland, it wasn't completed like my debut was when I first turned it in. It was just an idea, and it was a totally different. I'm such a discovery writer that the story I pitch maybe has the same character names, but it's never the same story after I've written it and gone through edits, and we go through 3 rounds of edits.
Yes.
We go through like a developmental and line edit, and then a proofreader goes through it. So that's four rounds of edits before it's ready for publication.
Yeah, and people don't realize that it takes a village to sort of raise your book. And an editor will come in, a good editor will come in and when on your first novel and say, hey, I think that it would work out better if your character did X, Y, and Z rather than Z, X, Y.
Yeah.
But at the same time, ultimately it's your decision and it's your creation, so you have to make those decisions on whether or not to follow the editor's advice, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And for mine, because I did do the developmental editor, and that was when I really started getting bites on it, was after I did that, because in my initial drafts, the main character, Ava, apparently was a little bit insufferable. How did she describe her? The editor said she was coldly ambitious, and she needed to be more likable in the beginning. She's like, I grew to like her, but it took too long.
Mm-hmm.
So it really makes a difference getting those edits in.
Exactly, and figuring out where it is, where she comes across as maybe being less likable. Did you have that same problem with changes in your characters, Sarah, when you were writing your books?
Wonderland was different for me. I actually got really upset with my editor because it was the shortest editorial letter I've ever been given, and I said, where's the edit? And I had to call him up, and he said, do you think now by 5 books you might know a thing or two? And I said, no. I want my edit. So I was able to talk through it with him and then talk through it with his wife. They're like a team of editors, and mostly I think I'm such a perfectionist, and it takes me so long to write that first draft, and I edit as I go, that I tend to turn in pretty clean drafts. That is not the way with the second book, though, because I basically rewrote that entire thing in a month before I turned it in. So I am expecting a full edit on that. But characters definitely surprise me in their development, and I don't always know how they're going to turn out or what's going to be best for them, but it does help to have that extra eye on it.
Exactly. Now, as an established writer yourself, you've been through the process 4 or 5 times. How many times did you have to go through rejection before that first book got published?
My story is a little interesting. I didn't really go through a querying process. I queried a few agents, literary agents in the beginning, but I found my literary agent at a conference, or my first literary agent, and he put my Unblemished, my first book, out on submission, and I had a offer for contract within 6 months of that. But I really just think it was good. It happened to be good timing. He happened to put it in front of the right editor at the right time in the beginning of submission. So I didn't go through that same I get rejections from readers. Those are my rejections. I get plenty of 1-star reviews and readers who don't don't love it. So I feel like that's how I'm earning my rejections, is from my readers.
From your readers. I've got to say that, obviously my opinion is if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it. And if it's constructive, then say it face to face rather than behind the walls of the internet. But in terms of, rejection, it is something that you have to take as a writer, and you sort of have to take with a bit of a grain of salt as well.
Yeah.
So that's part of the challenge of being being a writer, is learning how to take those rejections, or also taking those rejections and sort of twisting them into the positives of, okay, I can see where you're coming from here.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So world building. So one of the challenges of talking about a first book is we don't have a big long list of previous books to discuss, and we don't want to spoil a lot for you. But Vivid and the Wonderland Trials are both wonderful novels that you've created these really dynamic worlds in. To the audience, can you explain a little bit, do a short pitch about the worlds that you've both created?
So in Vivid, it's kind of a sort of a dystopian fantasy world. In this world, the color yellow is actually forbidden. It is banned because colors are a source of power. And there's 3 different magic types. The augmenters, or red magic, is kind of magic of the body, like strength and speed and things like that. The shapers is the blue magic, and that's sort of like, my husband called it telekinesis on steroids. They have object manipulation, and then the yellow magic is the mentalist, and that's like mind control. And it was considered so dangerous that the sort of government of the society decided that yellow is no longer allowed, because they can draw on colors to amplify their magic. And so that kind of sets the scene for that world, trying to keep people safe from this threat.
Did you come up with the world first, or did you come up with your characters first?
It was actually characters first. It started out with actually a dream about just one particular scene, which is now chapter 5 in the book, I think. And everything was built off that one scene, because I woke up and I just could not stop thinking about it. I wanted to know what happened to these characters, and there was involvement with like yellow. I don't want to like spoil for people who haven't read, and I thought, well, why the yellow, and why were they doing this? And so then my mind just kind of started working on that and building everything around that.
I'm big on characters too.
Yeah.
It is. It really is. And one of the cool things about both of your books is that you show rather than tell in a lot of ways for world building. And as a reader, I find that really refreshing. So rather than giving me 3 pages of exposition on how something works, both of you really try to avoid to do that. Is this something that's just a natural part of your style, or was this something that you really tried to avoid when building these worlds?
It was definitely something I had to develop, because the first drafts were pretty, I would say, a lot of info dump in the beginning. And then as I'm reading it, going through and going, it just kind of feels like you're hitting the reader with all this information. And it's like, that's not interesting. No one wants to read basically a summary of how everything works. And so then I started working on incorporating it into the action more, so that it was a little more dynamic and interesting to read about.
I think show versus tell is something that comes naturally after you work at it. So I didn't know what in the world it was when I first started novel writing. I just knew I loved to read books like Harry Potter, and I wanted to be a writer. And so then when I started getting critiques and submitting for writing contests, and you would hear that show versus tell, I think it gets ingrained into you because you hear it so much, and you start, and that working with an editor too, especially for my first novel, I think is what helped me really. It was like taking a crash course in how to write a novel, because oh nope, show me this, don't tell me how she feels, show me how she feels. And so it does start to become second nature, I think. And with Wonderland, I started with characters too. I knew I wanted to retell Wonderland, but I knew I wanted to be centered around games. And
Right.
so that's kind of what my world is centered around, is around these trials, around these games that they're competing for. They think they're competing for kind of like fame and fortune, but there's really more to it than that. But I started with Alice. Like, I knew I wanted to tell a story about Alice. And as you go through, I think, and the more you write and the more practice you get, you learn how to show instead of tell.
Exactly. I think of your series almost like The Magicians and the Hunger Games, but not as horribly violent. And then, and then I think of yours a lot like similar to maybe, uh, gosh, I often, for people who read Leigh Bardugo, for instance, and who read Suzanne Collins, I often put people over to yours. However, one of the things I like about your book so much is the fact that both of you focus on keeping it PG to PG 13, no, and you're maybe PG 13. I mean, it doesn't go really dark and heavy.
Yeah.
Was that something that you wanted to do in terms of content and quality?
Yeah, definitely for me, because I like to read stories that leave me feeling like some hope at the end. And there can be some darker moments, but the characters have to come out of that for me to feel satisfaction with the story. And it was really important for me to have books that a family could read together too, because some of my best memories are going on like long car trips with my family and having books to listen to together. And I didn't want to write books that people would read and say, oh, well, this isn't really a family book. And
Right.
because that, I think being able to share a book together is just one of the best things. And so that was important to me.
Same. I wanted to be able to write books that I can recommend to teenagers, and that I can recommend to, when moms ask, is this appropriate for my 12-year-old? Is this appropriate for my 13-year-old? I say, well,
Right.
this is what's in it. And you have to decide as the parent if, what content level you're okay with. But I have daughters, and I wanted just something that was appropriate for them. So I agree with wanting it to be a book a family could read together and pass on.
One of the things I struggle with as a selector for a bookstore and as giving out book recommendations is, how do I give out, if I have an advanced 12-year-old, how do I give them an age appropriate book that, especially, you don't want to give a book that's too violent or has too strong of language or too adult of themes, right? Because we've got a lot of advanced readers that come into the store. And so one of the things I really love is that I can confidently give both of your books, and every time they come back, I get really positive feedback on how good your books are. One of the things I really loved about your books, especially Sarah, is that you give us a sense of danger. You give us that level of moral ambiguity, but yet your characters, and both of your characters, really learn from their mistakes and redeem themselves. They kind of have a redemption arc within their own character as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a theme that, Enclave books as a whole, I think, tend to have that redemptive redemptive arc, but like Ashley said, just that thread of hope is something I think we both feel really passionate about including in our stories.
Exactly. Now, to give kind of the a little bit of further insights, your main characters are Ava and Blake, and Ava Elm,
Yeah.
right? Elm's a little bit of your bad boy, and then Blake is kind of Ava's love interest, but maybe more of a brother. And Ava's our main character, and she is a red. Now, what makes a red so special?
So the red magic users or augmenters, they have, like I talked about a little bit, they use kind of powers of the body. So um, they can be really strong or really fast, or they can also heal either themselves or someone else. And those are kind of their core characteristics. Um, so there's a lot of balance there because you have kind of two extremes where you could either really hurt someone or you could really help someone with that kind of power. And that's kind of one of the things throughout this series is finding balance.
Exactly. How far do you go? You know, she has superpowers, so to speak. How far can she go, or how far should she go with them? And with Wes, our Elm, he's a yellow magic user. He is an outlaw in this society, and she ends up making friends with an outlaw, essentially.
Yep. Getting into that kind of dangerous territory where she knows this is forbidden, but she's an incredibly curious character, and that's kind of what drives her. A lot of her decisions is just I need to know, and discovering more about that. I don't want to tell too much of the story, but
Right, exactly. There's only so much that we can tell about it. But here she is. She's a student at the school, and without making too much spoilers, here she is studying, and she basically, Elm just comes walking on by, flicks her in the forehead, and basically he's controlled her mind. It's sort of a scary proposition. One of the scariest shows I think I've ever seen is Jessica Jones, that first season with the guy who could control people's mind. And I think that was one of the scariest things. And so yellow magic is pretty frightening in your world. It's very powerful.
and that's kind of where the whole concept lies is nobody wants to feel like they don't have control of themselves anymore. When I think about that, that would terrify me. So you can kind of see where that comes from, why they would feel this is something we need to protect everybody from.
Do you have some? I want to ask you because I think that color in both of your books is really important. And in terms of when I read through your books, I'm thinking of a very bright film, where very saturated colors, everything is extra green, blue, red. Yours, Sarah, I read almost like that dull gray London, maybe, that Lord of the Rings sort of muted tone, you know what I mean? In terms of having a little bit more of that kind of pallor or cast. What did you have in terms of your mind with what you've written? Did you have a specific sort of idea of what your book would look like as you were writing it?
Yeah, I kind of felt the same way, like very vibrant colors and things. But also just thinking about, look at how much yellow is in this room, just alone among
Yeah.
books, and what the world would look like without that vibrancy and that brightness.
Yeah.
Because you'd still have plenty of bright, beautiful colors, but I feel like it would seem very lacking if you're missing any of them.
Exactly. Yeah. You've got that entire, well, and it's a primary color, right? Red, yellow, blue. Um, it all comes together and makes all the other colors. And there comes our dog, my dog Paul, saying hello. Hi, Paul. Hey, buddy. So, yeah, I really had kind of this palette when I was thinking of both of your books. Sarah, how about you? I mean, what did you think of?
Yeah, I feel like color and music are both two huge things for me when I'm writing. I mean, with each of my books, I knew what color I wanted to be the main focus of the cover. I said this is what the cover needs to be. For Unblemished, it was purple. I knew Wonderland had to be blue. And so I like that you said that you kind of see that gray London fog, kind of like the muted mist over it, and that's kind of how I felt about Wonderland, and especially with Alice having astigmatism, and she sees the world differently, and I have astigmatism, and so I was like, how does that affect how like light? Like I see a halo around the lights, like
Mm-hmm.
nothing is super crisp for me when I'm looking at it, and so how would that affect the way she views the world? And Alice, just I see very much as, you know, like blue. She likes blues, and then Chess, you know, he kind of has that more of that flare, that kind of pink,
Mm-hmm.
like color in his hair, and just what those different colors represent for me. And it was the same way with my book Coral. She sees like colors have different sounds and different meanings. And I think color can mean different things to different people. Like, I'm curious to know, Ashley, for you, did you have to research color theory, or how did you choose like which colors to represent which powers?
I looked into it a little bit. Like I knew as I was building, some the yellow was key in that one scene that I described. I knew that that was going to be the mind control. And then I kind of thought, well, red is often traditionally associated with power, so that makes sense. And I knew I wanted the primary colors, so then blue kind of just fell into place after that, after I decided the other two.
Well, there have been studies that have been shown that, yellow, for instance, is not a good color to use within for people who are suffering from mental anxiety, things like that, that can actually,
Yeah,
oddly enough,
I looked into that.
yeah,
A lot of
it's sort of fascinating to know how color theory and how color actually affects the brain. So it's sort of fun that you've chosen these. Now, one of the things I found really unique is what happens when your characters actually use the power or use a source.
Okay, so I had mentioned that color is the source of power. It literally is their source of power. So, like if they were a red magic user, they could drain the color from that chair over there. The chair would turn gray, and they would have a limited power source for a short amount of time.
And they all have stones also that
Yep.
they use to harness a little bit of their power from. Um, in terms of learning and growth, I know there's not a lot that we can divulge within your books about how your characters learn and grow, but can you maybe explain a little bit of your character's growth or what you were thinking of as you were writing and where you want your character to maybe begin and how you may eventually want to see them end?
So for me, a lot of Ava's journey, I think, is about just pursuing truth and true knowledge and discovering what's really true about her world and what she may have been misled to believe. And so a lot of her character arc is centered around that. And if you discover that something you thought was true suddenly isn't, how do you handle that? Where do you go from there? Because that can be pretty earth shattering to discover something you believed your whole life. Suddenly you realize it's not true. So that that's where Ava's headed.
For Alice, it was just she's really a loner. She's really independent. She doesn't like to have to need other people. She's like, well, used to being abandoned basically in her life, and the
Right.
one person who hasn't abandoned her tends to be kind of a helicopter and very strict and just completely opposite of how Alice's personality. So she doesn't like to need others, and she doesn't like to kind of open herself up to that possibility of pain, because if she relies on others and they leave her, then she's been abandoned again. So she kind of learns kind of how to rely on others and trust other people and open herself up to that possibility of pain, because when we open ourselves up to that, then we're opening up ourselves to love as well.
Exactly. and you see a big change within Alice from the beginning of the book towards the end of the novel. Are you excited with what you're going to give the readers in book 2 for Alice? Because I'm really excited about book 2.
I wasn't excited about it until I finished it, and it's a huge mess. But oddly enough, even though I know I have my work cut out for me in edits, it's the proudest I've ever been of a story. I'm really, really excited. I'm really excited about the cover, which I cannot say anything about right now because my publicist would have she's off with my head. But I'm really excited, and I hope readers like the direction that it went, because it really surprised me, and I'm hoping it will surprise them too.
So I've got to ask you, what are your favorite types of scenes when you're writing? What are your favorite type? Like, what are the ones that you sit in and you're like, I am really enjoying this. Like, this is my favorite.
For me, I loved pretty much anything with a lot of Elm. He was a really fun character to write, and he's very sarcastic and a little bit arrogant. And he was, I just had a good time writing his character. So any of the scenes where he and Ava are kind of bouncing back and forth off of each other, I enjoyed writing those scenes.
I like scenes with emotion and lots of dialogue, and my favorites are always the romantic tension between my two main love interests, and probably when they finally get to have that kiss that you're waiting the whole book for. I'm one of those people. I wait the whole book for the kiss. That's why I love Casey West contemporary novels, because her whole books are about waiting for the two main characters to kiss, and I love finally getting to write that scene because it's so much fun. It's so much fun to finally see these two characters come together, and I tend to like characters that are enemies. I wouldn't call Chess and Alice enemies, but she definitely finds him annoying throughout the story.
Well, I've got to ask. I mean, you know, as we all date, sometimes the people that we find that we gravitate to may be first the people who sort of annoy us a little bit. And I think that's kind of true in any relationship, right?
Absolutely.
Ashley, you're nodding your head. So in terms of that, I mean, both of you do have this love interest, these love triangles. How do you moderate that level of romance to the level of action? Because your books are also very exciting. And you've also got that level of mystery, which I really enjoy as well. What's going on? What's happening? How are we going to get from point A to point B? I love the puzzles within your book, Sarah, which are just really ingenious in terms of how Alice is going to solve these. And so there's that entire mystery element into both of your books. So how do you balance all three and feel like it's
Well, I think a lot of it is just doing your best to stay true to the genre, because, you know, I love a good romance thread in the story. Like, I would be disappointed if there was none. But since it's not actually a romance novel, you have to make sure that it's a flavor and not the whole story.
Right.
And one way I've heard to kind of gauge that is, if you removed the romance, would you still have a story?
Right.
So I kind of wrote with that in mind, with each scene, like, okay, I like the fun romance stuff, but if it wasn't there, is there still a story here that readers would be interested in? And I think that helps to keep that balance in there when you're thinking of it that way.
exactly.
I would say Wonderland is probably my least romantic book of all of my books. I mean, all of my books have the romance thread. I think, too, it's important to give your readers a chance to have a break from the emotion. So, like, if I've just written a romantic tension emotional scene, they need to have a chance to breathe. Like, they need to have a chance to look forward to the next scene between those two characters. So I don't ever put two of those back to back. If I've just had a really emotional argument between two characters, then the next scene needs to be a break from that, whether it just be, you know, Alice by herself, or an action moment, or something fun where she meets a new friend. You have to have those ups and downs, because if you're constantly on the high tension of action, 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 and you don't give your readers a chance to have a break from that, it's almost going to cause anxiety. It causes me anxiety to think about if the whole book was just trial, trial, trial with no breaks in between to build those character relationships, and to have those alone moments. I mean, we as humans, we need that time alone. We need that break from the busy activity. So I just find that it's important to kind of to bring your reader up on that roller coaster, but to bring them back down and have those lower moments in between.
Yep.
So how do you two get into the teenage brain? Because you both get into the teenage brain brilliantly. I mean, how do you kind of get in there to think of, you know?
Just kind of thinking about high school, the drama that was in high school. If I really want to torture myself, I'll read my old journal entries from when I was in high school and see the things that were important to me then that, you know, aren't necessarily as important now. And then I've got, you know, nieces and nephews who are teenagers and looking at what's going on in their lives and things.
Yeah, I think, like, thinking back to, like, what was the end of the world as a teenager, to me now is like, why did I care so much about that? But I mean, I read a lot of YA. YA is the main genre I read, so that helps. And I mean, currently now it helps that I have a teenager at home. So I'm experiencing kind of like what my mom experienced. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I put my mom through this. I really cared about that. And so just seeing it from that flip side perspective of the parent perspective, it helps me to think back, okay, like how is this important to me as a teenager? And that helps me, I hope, be a better parent too, because I can see it both from the mom perspective and the teenager perspective. I also watch a lot of Gilmore Girls. And that helps.
That's always actually, it's a great show. So one of the things that cracked me up is a couple weeks ago, our store owner and Lori R. King, who writes the Sherlock Holmes pastiche, they're very good friends, and they traveled together to Japan so Lori could research one of her books. And so the question somebody asked was, what's it like traveling with a friend who also happens to be a writer? And she said, it's going to a lot of cafes and being quiet. And so I'm curious, do you both, are you kind of that quiet, introspective type? If you go to a cafe, are you like observing people constantly to get kind of ideas and mannerisms, maybe even working in the back of your mind for that next novel that you'll be working on?
Yeah, I think I've always been a bit of a people watcher. I definitely listen more than I talk most of the time. And you know, I like to participate in the conversation when I'm out with friends and things, but I do a lot of observing too. I don't know that with 3 little kids, I don't usually get a very quiet space when I'm actually writing. But when I can get that, I do prefer it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to people watch. People are interesting. But I also am a big, like, film person. Like, I love movies and I like to watch how the characters interact. But I'm also a weirdo because I like crime documentaries and the psychology of, like, how different people think, like, is really interesting to me. I feel like if I wasn't a writer, I would have studied, like, psychology, just because the way the different minds work and the way that different people get to different conclusions and react to different things is really fascinating to me.
Yeah. Yeah, crime documentaries, I can't watch at night. I won't watch those because too many ideas go through my mind. I'll be like, okay, I'm setting the alarm to the house. I'm gonna check all the windows and the doors. Exactly. Paul's getting dragged up onto my bed. We're gonna have a Thunder Buddy moment. So yeah, no, but it is true that you've got to watch and you've got to observe and getting into the mind of people. I think that's one of the hardest things to do because that becomes part of your voice. Another thing that I really love that our store owner said is that you can fix plot, but you can't fix voice. Both of you have incredible voices, and when did you discover you had a great voice?
I don't know if I thought about it a whole lot. It's just as I'm writing different characters, I already have a sense of who they are and what their personality is in my head, and it just kind of, for the most part, comes naturally. When you're drafting, sometimes there's parts you go through and you're like, that doesn't sound like them. That's not what they would say, and you go back and you revise those lines. I feel like for me, it's not something that I think about too much. It's just kind of automatic once I'm in that character's head.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think any writer generally wakes up in the morning and thinks, wow, I found my voice today. Like, I have a great voice. I've made it. I think we all doubt, like, every book I turn in, I'm like, this is the book that they're going to know, that I can't write anything. I think the voice develops, and through edits, too. I don't feel like my voice really comes through until I've cleaned up my books. I definitely feel like first time around, it's very flat, very plain, very generic. And so through revising and really taking time to find the right word, I think is so important. And I think that's where the voice comes through.
Is that why when you say you're a discoverer, or sometimes you hear the word pantser?
Yeah.
Pantser versus plotter is one of the common terms, or I like the term discoverer as well, actually. I think that's a better way to describe it because pantser sounds like you don't know what you're doing, and you know what you're doing. But in terms of that, I mean, you've got to, since you do such careful edits the first time around, you're probably cleaning up some of that stuff that's not the right word, or they wouldn't say it that way, they would actually say it this way, right?
Yeah, I mean, if I can't find the right word and I know I'm going to spend an hour on a rabbit trail when I really need to get words on the page, I'll put brackets in like big capital letters, like find a better word for right here. And then I move on, and then I'll go back, and then that's really easy to see when I do have the time to like go down a rabbit trail, because I could literally stop every sentence and go on a rabbit trail of finding the right color, the right word, the right dress, description. Do you do the same kind of thing?
Yeah, I have learned that if I don't start out just throwing the words down, I'm never going to get the book done. I can focus a lot more in revising if I know where the story's going and I know I have the basic plot laid down. Because otherwise I stress about, well, is it going to get where it needs to go? And so as long as I've got the main stuff there, I can always go back and refine things.
So we're getting at that point where it's getting really uncomfortable to sit in the chairs. So I'm going to open it up to Q&A. These are called sudden comfort chairs, and you discover suddenly when they're no longer comfortable. So I was wondering, does the audience here, or do we have any questions online for any of the authors? Yes.
I'm a huge fan of your book. Helped me through a really tough time in my life.
Oh, thank you.
So what was your inspiration behind that?
Oh, that we could spend another hour talking about that. With Coral, that was the hardest, but that was the book that made me almost quit writing. I was sure that it was the worst thing I'd ever written. I thought it was going to be so brilliant because the timeline was going to be written backwards, like in the movie Memento, where the timeline goes backwards. And that doesn't work in a novel, or at least I couldn't do it. I'm not that brilliant. So as I was writing it, I didn't really know what it was about. And I was going through a very difficult time in my life, and going through my own trauma a little bit. And I got to right before I turned it in, and I came across the line in the original Little Mermaid that says, "A mermaid has no tears, and therefore she suffers so much more." And it hit me, and I was like, oh my goodness, this book is about mental health. So the book I turned in was not about mental health, but with that book, I said to my editor, just so you know, this isn't the book that it's going to be. It's about mental health, and this is why. So that was very difficult for her to edit, as you can imagine, that I turned in a book that I was like, I have to rewrite this whole thing. And I had to rewrite it 3 times in order, but it was really just that line in the original, because I feel like it's just so true. Like when you're going through that trauma and you're going through the really dark moments, it's almost like you become numb to it because you don't want to feel what is going on. So you don't want to cry and you don't want to let it out, because the moment you cry and the moment you allow yourself to feel that emotion, that makes it real. And so that just really like hit me because of what I was personally going through in kind of how Coral's story needed to go, and how she, and I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't read it, but how she processes, how Brooke processes her own feelings the way that she does, and you've read it so you know. So that book was almost like I was Brooke and I was processing my own feelings through that book. And I definitely reached out to a mental health professional. Like I had a lot of beta readers kind of go over it to make sure that I was really being sensitive to, you know, the different aspects of mental health. But it was really that book, I was done. I was like, I'm not going to write anymore. This is it. And somehow it became what it was. And I'm really grateful that it touched you. And that's, oddly enough, the book that I thought everybody would hate is the one I get the most messages about.
Isn't that neat? And every author, I think, has one of those books within their career that touches somebody so much. But what's interesting is that you said you thought you'd give up writing. And I think with writers, you almost have to tell your stories. There's something in there that one may have drained you for a while, but Alice came to you.
Alice was my fun book. Alice was a reflection of like the newfound hope that I found in my life, and that what God brought into my life. And I wanted to write something fun to reflect like the good things that were going on. And not everything is good all the time and can't be good all the time, but Alice was definitely kind of that shift for me. And I had walked a really hard path, and now I got to have fun, because Coral was not fun, but it needed to be written.
Right. And writers really, I mean, you struggle, and it's a lot of work. Some people think, oh, you sit home, you eat bonbons, you're in your pajamas all day, but you're writing, right? Flow, exactly.
It's scones, Patrick, not
Scones, bonbons. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Do either of you have like a dream cast for your books, like any actors that you envision? Mine changes every day, so I don't know.
So for those online who couldn't hear, do they have an idea of a dream cast for their books? So, yeah, yours changes every day. So who's today?
Like one I really thought would be good for Elm. I don't even remember his name, and that's my other thing. I'm really bad at remembering actor names, so I'm like, it's that one person. The young man who was in Enola Holmes, if anyone's seen that movie, I think he'd be really good for Elm.
What's his name?
Yes.
Louis Partridge. Okay.
I kind of thought he'd be a good Elm. April is escaping me at the moment. I don't know that I've actually seen someone yet who I thought that would be a perfect Ava. So we'll do a rain check on that one.
Who do you have you read Vivid yet? Okay. So nice.
So I'll revisit that one.
Chess is Zac Efron. He's been Zac Efron from the beginning. Zac Efron from Greatest Showman. He's
Okay.
been Zac Efron, and that may be the cheesiest thing ever, but I love High School Musical, and I love Zac Efron. So then Alice, is her name Anna Sophia Robb she was in Bridge to Terabithia. Alice, I went back and forth for a minute. Alice was Taylor Swift, but Taylor Swift's getting older. I'm like, I need somebody who has that more youth. Not that Taylor Swift always looks 20, but just I need somebody that had that more girlish look to her. And Anna Sophia Robb, particularly from Bridge to Terabithia, and then for Jack. Is Nick Jonas, because somebody had to be Nick Jonas. And really, I'm trying to think of who else. I never really had a vision for Maddie Hatter, just that she had the lavender hair.
Right.
So, I mean, we've got the real Maddie sitting in the audience tonight. My daughter is who Maddie Hatter's named after. So yeah, but there's just got to be Zac Efron. Anybody else? If it ever became a movie, that would be what I would demand in the contract: is Zac Efron must be Chess.
So do you have any of your books been optioned yet, Sarah?
No.
No. One of these days, though, we'll have that conversation where you'll say, "I can't say anything, but I have signed papers."
Here's hoping.
That's usually what you end up hearing. Ashley, do you hope Vivid gets optioned?
That would be amazing. I mean, I think most writers would love to see their books as films someday, or Netflix series.
Yeah,
Exactly.
we're finally going to get the selection, right, on Netflix, supposedly, after how many years?
Exactly. Well, I just finished reading and watching Shadow and Bone for our book club. Here we do a science fiction book club, and on occasion we do a young adult. So we did Shadow and Bone, and we compared and contrasted the book and the show. So it's every author's dream, but then again, they change so much. If they came in and said, I would love to do your book, but we're going to change some things, how would you feel?
It depends on what they wanted to change. It depends on, it's hard. Like, we see this happen a lot, with Netflix and how they took The Summer I Turned Pretty and they added a lot of their own things. There would have to be content that I would be comfortable with. Like, they can't turn it into a rated R when it's really a PG-13 book.
Right.
I would be okay with certain creative things, but there's certain things that I don't think that I would be okay with, and I'd have to say no to. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I feel the same. Like, I understand when you're adapting a book to screen, there's things that work really well in a novel that do not work well on a screen. Like, I remember people talking about, well, they didn't convey how hungry Katniss was in the Hunger Games movie. I'm like, do you really want to watch 2 hours of her clutching her stomach and groaning? Like, you can describe that in a book and have it be interesting, but not so much in a movie. So those kind of changes I'm okay with. But as Sarah said, I would have to make sure it stayed, in the spirit that I wrote the original.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Any other questions from the audience?
There's a bit of a long roll and a lot of changes.
There's a lot of in between working to improve. And then as far as books that were influential, it's hard to pick just one because you kind of take bits and pieces from everything. But I think the book I read that really made me feel like I wanted a more of like a visual feel to my story that made me really want to write something that was vibrant, was escaping my brain right now. It was actually a autobiography, a memoir called Still Points North by Lane Newman. She had such a rich writing style, and I really wanted to be able to do that. And that's one of the first books I remember reading. It's just so good. And I don't want to embarrass you, but Sarah Ella as well, when I read her Unbroken series, or Unblemished, uh, your writing descriptive style is just beautiful, and that inspired me too.
Thank you. For the first question, I would say learn to take constructive criticism. Don't take all criticism, because some criticism is not constructive, but find people who can pour into you and invest in you, whether that be a critique partner or a teacher or somebody at a writing conference or somebody who can help you grow as a writer, and learn to take constructive criticism, because that is the biggest thing I think that really paved my path, was having somebody who was willing to look at my writing and tear it up in all the red ink and crying for a minute, and then, like Ashley said, doing the work, like being willing to put in the work on it to make it better. And then for the second part, it's probably cliche to say Harry Potter influenced me, which it did, but what really pushed me forward, I think, in finally getting Unblemished, like, worked on and that idea down onto the page, was Shannon Dittamore's Angel Eyes trilogy. It's paranormal, but and she ended up becoming one of my really good friends. But she was a mom at home with little kids, and she would stay up late at night rocking her colicky baby, and she had written a blog post on it, and that's when she would brainstorm her book. And her books she has beautiful writing, and I thought, well, if she is able to do this as a mom with babies at home, then maybe I don't have to wait to do it either. And that's really what inspired me to stop putting it off and to finally get the words down onto the page.
Exciting. That's so cool. Well, Sarah, Ashley, thank you so much for coming in tonight and talking about your books. Ashley, with your book, Vivid, and Sarah, with your book, The Wonderland Trials, which are your newest. However, Sarah, you're lucky enough to live here in town, and we've got a good working relationship. So for those of you who are watching, if you want any backlist signed or something like that, you can order through the store, and we'll work with Sarah to get it signed at some point in time, usually a couple times, usually probably every other month or so. Sarah's able to come on down to sign and personalize books and things like that for the store, and then we can ship them on out to you. Sarah, where can they find you? And Ashley, where can they find you?
You can